In this video we're going to talk about cold cases that have been solved by the internet. Everything has its pros and cons, and the internet is no different. There are a lot of stories where the internet was used for evil purposes. On the contrary, there have been instances when people used the internet to solve crimes. Ordinary people were able to succeed where professional crime agencies and police departments failed. Let's have a look at some of these cases where this revolutionary technology was used for the betterment of humanity. Here are 10 cold cases solved by the internet. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on my future videos. 10. Hit and run. Catching someone after a hit and run used to be a pretty difficult task in the pre-internet days, as there's usually little evidence to go on in those cases. If you're lucky and still alive, the driver may leave some conclusive evidence behind. That may still not be enough, though, unless they outright drop their driving license or a swab full of their saliva at the scene. We're not saying that the internet has improved conviction rates in hit-and-run cases, though we know of at least one instance where the culprit was caught because of the online community. It happened in Washington, where a cyclist was hit and killed by a collision, though the cops didn't have a clue as to the perpetrator. The photo of the scene was eventually uploaded to Reddit, asking other people for help identifying vehicle parts. While the poster likely just did it out of curiosity, things got serious when an ex-state car inspector was able to pinpoint the precise make and model of the vehicle in question. Unfortunately for the man responsible, not many people in the area owned a mid-1980s Chevrolet Silverado at the time, which led to his arrest and eventual conviction. 9. Abraham Shakespeare. 42-year-old Abraham Shakespeare, who had recently won millions of dollars in the Florida lottery, was murdered in 2009 by his acquaintance and self-appointed financial advisor, Doris D. Moore. She hid Shakespeare's body under a concrete slab in the backyard of a house she purchased with his money, and when police zeroed in on her, she tried to blame the murder on her own 14-year-old son before claiming self-defense. Moore also tried to pay someone to move Abraham's body and offered his son's money to lie to police about when they had seen him last. Among the many dumb things Moore did to hide her crime, she also created a profile on internet message board web sleuths to talk about the case. She had heard users were talking about her as a potential suspect, and she decided to log on to clear her name. All she succeeded in doing was tying herself even more closely to the crime after web sleuths owner Tricia Griffiths alerted authorities and provided IP data proving Moore was posting about herself. She was convicted of Shakespeare's murder and is currently serving a life sentence. 8. Tracking your daughter's killers on MySpace. This story is the topic of the fairly recent Netflix release, Why Did You Kill Me?, a documentary showing how the family of Crystal Theobald tracked down her murderers using social networking. After Theobald was shot dead at age 24, her mother and cousin made a fake MySpace profile in her image. They used it to find the identities of a group of local gang members who they believed were involved in her killing, luring them in with Theobald's picture and then catfishing them in the messages. By doing this, they were able to eventually find the owner of the car that had been at the scene of her death, the people in the car, and the events leading up to the fatal shootout. Police weren't too happy with the family's amateur sleuthing, but in the end they were able to find useful information. With the family's investigation, they were able to find who was responsible for Crystal's death and make some arrests and convictions, giving the family some of the closure they needed. 7. Shaky Footage. America is by no means new to extrajudicial killings by cops, except that now, thanks to modern technology like cameras, it's way more difficult to get away with it. That doesn't mean that it still doesn't happen, though they just have to make sure there's no one around to witness or record it. That realization, however, was lost on Michael Slaughter, a police officer in South Carolina convicted of shooting and killing an unarmed black man called Walter Scott. He wasn't immediately charged, though, as the footage shot by witnesses at the scene was too shaky and inconclusive to get a conviction. That was, of course, until a Canadian student online saw the video and decided to stabilize it. Daniel Vosshart was studying cinematography focused on image stabilization at the time, and wanted to do something about what he perceived to be a racially motivated crime. He worked on the video and posted it as a GIF on Reddit, which, apart from later proving to be conclusive evidence, mobilized the online community in support of the victim. 6. The identity of the Strongsville Skeleton. Lots of interesting things have been discovered on Reddit, but this really takes the cake. The website helped find the identity of a skeleton based on research that was carried out a decade before the birth of the internet. Back in 1975, a trio of boys found a skeleton in the woods of Strongsville, Ohio. They alerted the police, who were able to ascertain that the cause of death was a gunshot to the head. They further noted that the body was that of a white woman in her early 20s, but that was about all they could gather. Fast forward a few decades and a woman called Christina Skates began uploading her research into the case on Unsolved Mysteries and another popular amateur detective site called Web Sleuths. Thanks to her information and images of the skull, an artist called Carl Koppelman was able to put together a reconstruction of what the skeleton may have looked like when alive. The illustration ended up looking strikingly similar to Linda Pagano, a woman who had been reported missing a year before the skeleton was discovered. DNA testing put this theory to task and it was confirmed that the unidentified remains could now be identified as Linda. 5. Gregory May. In 2001, a trucker found the remains of a human head encased in concrete in a bucket at a truck stop north of Kansas City, Missouri. For 5 years, while police in Missouri did what they could to identify the head in the bucket, a whole other team in Bellevue, Iowa was investigating the disappearance of Gregory May, a 55-year-old tattoo artist and Civil War memorabilia collector. Julie Miller, a friend of May's, eventually confessed that her boyfriend Doug DeBruin killed May and they disposed of his body together. DeBruin was charged in 2004, but it would be Iowa's first murder trial without a body, and prosecutors weren't confident. Investigators in Missouri enlisted Frank Bender, a renowned forensic sculptor who created lifelike busts based on skulls of unidentified human remains, to reconstruct the face of the head in the bucket. They posted the bust on the Doe Network message boards, and Ellen Leach, a seasoned web sleuth, made it her mission to find a match, and she did. DNA tests confirmed that the head in the bucket was Gregory May only days before DeBruin's trial was set to begin. Thanks to the identification, the trial went ahead with solid physical evidence and Doug DeBruin was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. 4. The infamous Buckskin Girl is identified. After almost 4 decades of anonymity, the identity of a dead girl was found in just a matter of hours by an organization using their expertise in a very handy web database. So-called Buckskin Girl got her name for the unique buckskin poncho she was found wearing. For years, knowledge about her didn't extend past her cause of death and her basic physical information, but using an incredible modern tool, one nonprofit was able to finally solve the mystery. The DNA Doe Project is run by volunteers, using genetic genealogy to track down the identities of those who have been previously robbed of them. The organization processes and uploads genetic data to a public genealogy database called GEDmatch, most commonly used to help people find their biological parents and the like. Self-taught genealogists were helping police identify criminals and victims almost by the week. Suddenly, it seemed, anyone with the right savvy and an internet connection really could solve cold cases from their living room. From there, they are sometimes able to do what law enforcement has not achieved in the decades before them: crack the mystery of a Jane Doe wide open. In 2018, 37 years after her body was discovered, Buckskin Girl was identified as Marsha Lenore King, a 21-year-old woman from Arkansas who went missing a year before her death. She isn't the only one to have been identified by the DNA Doe Project, as their site boasts a number of success stories found thanks to their dedication, DNA expertise, and one incredibly versatile public website. 3. Push to suicide. When the 18-year-old Nadia Kajuji committed suicide off a bridge on the Rideau River in Ottawa, her friends and family were justifiably devastated. She was going through a lot, including a previous miscarriage along with pressure at school. Needless to say, if you or anyone around you is feeling the same way, please reach out to someone around you. As the story unfolded, though, it was soon discovered that she didn't take the decision on her own. She had spoken to someone called Cami D, real name Melcher Dinkle, on an online forum a few weeks before the suicide, who had convinced her to take the final step. His identity was later discovered by Celia Bay, an online counselor, who also discovered that he had been doing this for a while. All in all, he had convinced 5 or 6 people to commit suicide in the past, and was charged with 1 count of attempted assisting suicide and 1 of assisted suicide, thanks to Celia. 2. Grateful Doe. A car accident in Virginia in 1995 killed 21-year-old Michael Hager and an unidentified passenger. The passenger became known as Grateful Doe because he was wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt and had concert tickets in his pocket. Police followed a number of clues, including whether Hagen and his passenger knew each other, but eventually came to the conclusion that Grateful Doe was probably a hitchhiker. Despite their best efforts and a few strokes of bad luck, they couldn't pinpoint Grateful Doe's identity. In 2012, a facial reconstruction was released by the Center of Missing and Exploited Children in an effort to identify him, but there were no developments until 2015 when photos of a man named Jason who resembled Grateful Doe started circulating the internet. BuzzFeed and the New York Post picked up the story, spreading the word even further. Police tracked down Jason's mother, who had only just filed a missing persons report even though she hadn't heard from her son since 1995. Since Jason was living a nomadic lifestyle as he followed the Grateful Dead around the country, she had assumed he was still alive somewhere. Police tested Grateful Dead's remains in 2015 and he was positively identified as Jason Callahan. 1. A 50-year cold case finds its culprit. Solving a mystery that has been plaguing a family for almost half a decade can sometimes start with something as simple as a Facebook post, and that's just what happened in solving a 1968 hit-and-run case that left a child dead. After going down to the shops on Halloween, 4-year-old Carolee Sadie Ashby was hit by a drunk driver who didn't so much as stop to check on her. The case had haunted Russ Johnson of the Fulton Police Department for years, as no leads eventually led the case to go cold. On retiring, he took a chance, posting details of the incident to a Facebook page that dealt with local history. From there, a woman reached out to him and they had their first lead in decades. The woman used to live in the area, and told Johnson about how local man Douglas Parkhurst had asked her to give him an alibi if the police were to speak to her. She explains that she rejected his request, not knowing what he might be needing an alibi for but secretly suspecting it could be related to Carolee's death. All those years later, the police department reopened the case and questioned Parkhurst again. They interviewed him at the time but just took his word for it when he denied knowing anything. Clearly, having a few decades to let his guilt stew had changed Parkhurst's outlook, and he admitted to killing the girl, having been drinking that night before getting behind the wheel. Unfortunately for the girl's family, the statute of limitations had long since passed and Parkhurst will face no consequences. But at least they've got some sort of closure, right? Thank you so much for watching until the end. Did you enjoy our video? Let me know which cases was the most interesting to you. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel, so you don't miss out on my future videos.